Hello, Mini Monet's artists. Today I have a more technical project for you. And this is kind of geared more for some of my older students, but it's also something that my younger artists could practice too. What we're going to cover today is how we take a flat shape and give it form. So form is when something has a three-dimensional aspect to it instead of just being flat, the top and the bottom. So you're trying to make it look three-dimensional, which would be taking something from our Candyland card and trying to make it look like a cube. I'm going to teach basic shading and how to draw a cube today. And I'm also going to show how you can take a flat circle and turn it into a cylinder. I love teaching about cylinders because it can relate to drawing animals, human arms and legs. We all have this natural cylindrical shape. Okay, so first I'm going to start off with the cylinder. So now when we think about a cylinder, it kind of just looks like a rectangle, but instead of having straight edges, a square or a rectangle for the top and the bottom, it has a circle. So when we draw that, you want to get kind of the best straight lines you can. We're going to make this one standing tall instead of laying on its side. But instead of drawing a straight line across, which would flatten it out and make it look like a square, we're going to curve the line. Almost like giving it a smile on the bottom and a smile that becomes an oval on top. This oval represents this circle here. Now, you can keep simple ways to show form, and I could just include lines. Keeping a similar curved line for the bottom and the top. And then we have made a cylinder. Someone looking at this would say, yes, that has form. It looks round. Another way you could show that is you could apply a different pressure with your pencil, and you could press down really hard to lift really light towards the middle, and then press down really hard again. These types of lines can also show form by creating a look of a shadow, in that the sides of the can or the cylinder are darker than the part in the middle, as if there's a shadow here and it's light there. Now for shading, I like to teach that you hold the pencil at the end near the eraser so that you can use all of the graphite that's exposed around the wood. Start with a medium pressure, and you want to pretty much color all along the side of the can, or sorry, the cylinder. I've got a can in front of me, so I keep referring to it as the can. Now, one thing you want to be aware of and avoid is what I call stitches. And I'm trying to kind of exaggerate them here. It's where your coloring overlaps and it leaves these kind of dark areas that to me look like old stitches. So take careful time. You may need to go back and fill in the shading area in between those stitches. I get them a lot, but they're really easy to fix. And then as you continue to color, or shading, it feels like coloring, I want you to work on not pressing as hard so that by the time you get near the middle of your can, you're barely pressing down. This is starting to give that can and the cylinder form by showing that there's a shadow. There is a dark spot or a dark side and a light side. See, trying to avoid my stitches here as I work my way across the can. Now, I always like to start with a medium darkness because it's easier to darken your shadow and your shading than it is to lighten it up, especially if you don't have a very good eraser on your pencil. And see, at this point, you can kind of touch it up and make a really dark side to this can or cylinder. And then it starts looking dark to light, that hopefully you're starting to see a gentle curve for form with your shadow. Then you would come back on this side and do the same thing, dark to light. Now you notice I'm having a little bit harder time. It's not as smooth. I shade better from left to right because I am right-handed. You can spin your paper around. Just make sure you mark. So if you need something to be completely vertical or at a 90-degree angle, where that is. So when you spin your page, to use your strength for which way you shade better, that it doesn't start to become crooked. I've done it a lot. I'll admit it still happens. I'll try and rush through this a little bit because I still want to be able to show a good way for shading a cube. And so you just start working your way to light, meet the other side of your cylinder. Take some time, fix any stitches that you see or seams, and then kind of for a finishing touch, really add a dark edge. And if I spin it back, bump the camera to where it was, you've got some form of a cylinder. Now we made light coming in this way, so if you want to color the top, you would do much of the same. You would keep this side dark, working your way to light, and then just a little bit darker over here. You want to make it hollow, make it really dark near the top edge before building your shadow getting lighter towards the top. So a couple different ways you can play with the top part of a cylinder. Now for this one, we're going to take a square and make it into a cube. I want you to try your first one. Instead of having it spaced this way, I want you to turn it so that you see a square that faces you. And then you will see the top and just one side. I feel like it's easier to start learning how to shade a cube when you can only see 3 of the 6 faces. Now again, for time, I'm going to just use something small to make my square. I'm going to use the corner edge of a ruler on one side, then we're going to make it meet up on the other side. And there is my square. It's kind of hard to set him in my space to where you can see him the way that I would want you to try and draw him. Now, to keep it simple, like I said, we're just going to shade 3 faces of this cube. I want you to think of 3 diagonal lines and you want them to travel in the same direction. Remember, diagonal lines are straight. They're just not laid down horizontally, side to side, and they're not standing tall, up and down. They go any way in the middle. Then again, if you want, you can use your ruler to make another nice straight edge for the top. Straight edge for the bottom. Went a little bit past. So I'm going to use my eraser. Okay, so now I'm going to use the lights that I have in my dining room to help guide you for how to shade this. We're not going to put any shading or coloring on the top part of the square. That's where my light is directly coming down onto. We're going to focus on the right side and the left side. Now for me, this side, the front, is actually the darkest. This side here, if I scoot it over, is not as dark as the front. So again, I don't like to start with the darkest because you can always go darker. I'm going to start with my medium. So if you think of it as dark, medium, and light. And I'm going to hold my pencil, again, near the eraser, try and make it so that as much graphite is connecting with the paper as possible. And I'm going to start coloring. Coloring reminds me of shading. I shade better side to side, so I'm actually going to spin my paper so I can get a better shading and avoid some of the stitching. Try and make sure not to go outside of the lines for this project. When you're learning and practicing shadowing, it is very important to try and keep yourself inside of the area that needs the shadow. There we go. Tried to avoid my stitches. Got that shadow. Now here's the trick to make this side even darker. So I'm going to press even harder. I will scoop my fingers up on the pencil so I get a better grip. And I'm going to start adding some coloring in. You may be able to see that it even changes the way that the pencil graphite lays down on top of the paper when you hold your pencil more upright. No matter which way you spin your paper though, always try and keep it moving in the same direction. We don't want to see this in there. You want to keep it nice and consistent. So because it's easier to go darker, I've saved the dark for last. I usually like to quickly get the middle filled in dark, and then I go back and work small and carefully, avoiding getting outside of the line, avoiding any of the stitches, to end up with a nice dark area for our cube. I'm gonna try and hide that in there. Thought I went the other way. So there you have a shaded cube. The light sort for this one, unfortunately my kitchen was kind of like this way and this way. So we went with this being the light, this being the medium, and this be the dark. And I feel like I could even make this darker if I took a little more time. You can even see, you could add the shadow on the bottom. We'll talk about ground shadows in another video, but they're kind of coming off in all directions. Like I said, that's a whole nother video for some shadow on my cube. So I hope you've enjoyed this lesson. I would love to see what you come up with. Email me at minimonays@gmail.com or #MiniMonaysArt. Can't wait to see some of the form shading that you come up with this week.